Yesod is a purple armored total assault boss who has 2 phases, each needing you to explore 2 completely different ideas. In phase 1, your ability to manage your skill rotation and minimize cost wastage will be tested because bad management causes overflow and underperformance. Phase 2 is a team building challenge. You'll need to identify details of your students' kits as you'll be putting together a team with no DPS. This video will cover Yesod's abilities, including any additional abilities you'll encounter on Insane and above difficulties. I'll lay down some advice on how to deal with these abilities, and then provide some general guidance on team building. If you prefer reading text, I have document guides written by myself linked in the description of this video. Otherwise, welcome to SCHALE Raid Tactics. I'm Kozy, and thank you for coming. In phase 1, you will fight Yesod's main body. This phase is very interactive and you'll be constantly switching your attention between different objects on the screen. I'm going to do this guide differently to how I normally do these boss guides. Normally, I would outline the boss's passes first before talking about the active mechanics. However, because of how intertwined every single component plays together, doing it my usual way could be confusing. So instead, I'm going to introduce each mechanic in an order I think will be easier to digest. The first thing you need to know is Yesod will naturally resist 95% of all damage. If your students were to directly attack Yesod's body, they will only deal 5% of the damage they were supposed to be doing. This means attacking the boss immediately is going to be futile. You will need to complete mechanics to progress the raid, but before you can make this progress, let me explain how Yesod plans to kill you. Yesod has 3 major attacks: a right hand slam, a left hand slam, and a vacuum. Each of these attacks, if they land, are intended to deal lethal damage and wipe your team. Most of this raid will be spent preparing your team to block these major attacks. 6 pillars will spawn while Yesod is preparing his attacks. Your students can break these pillars. In order for you to successfully block Yesod's attack, you need to illuminate the field a certain color corresponding to the pillars. To block Yesod's right hand, you'll break the blue pillars on the left of the screen to illuminate the field blue. For you to block Yesod's left hand, you'll break the red pillars on the right of the screen to illuminate the field red. In order to block the vacuum, the field must remain neutral, which technically can be achieved by doing nothing. If our objective was purely survival, you only need to hit 1 pillar for the hands and no pillars for the vacuum to get by. But our objective isn't survival, we have a boss to kill. So how do we do damage? At the bottom left of the screen is the analysis gauge. The gauge has 6 stages, measured from level 0 to level 5. As the gauge fills, your strikers, tactical supports, and summons will receive buffs to help them overcome Yesod's 95% damage resistance. At level 0 and beyond, all on-field units will receive a 200% sonic effectiveness buff, increasing the efficiency of specifically your purple damage dealers. Then, at every stage from level 1 to 5, your team will gain a 20% attack buff, a 20% crit rate buff, a 25% X damage buff, and a 25% crit damage buff. In total, at stage 5, your team will altogether have 200% sonic effectiveness, 100% extra attack, 100%, that is double their crit rate, 125% extra X damage, and 125% extra crit damage. If we were to make some naive assumptions, stage 5 will have your students dealing roughly 8.2 times their damage, or 16.4 times their damage if they're a purple student. In short, a maxed analysis gauge completely counters Yesod's inherent damage resistance. So how do we fill this analysis gauge? The gauge is filled by the same pillars you use to block Yesod's attacks. Every pillar you break will increase the analysis gauge by 1 level, so in order to both survive and deal damage, you will need to destroy a total of 5 pillars, with the last pillar being the pillar that will block Yesod's attack. But you can't break the pillars in any way you like. If the field is already blue and you break the blue pillar, your team will take lethal damage and likely wipe. If the field is already red and you break the red pillar, your team will take lethal damage and likely wipe. You also cannot break 2 pillars at the same time using the same student. If you do, your team will be stunned for 10 seconds, which would likely lead to a wipe. What you actually need to do is alternate between red and blue pillars. Whenever you break a pillar opposite to the color of the ground, it will turn neutral, allowing you to, once again, break the pillar that would ultimately block Yesod's attack. If all of that was confusing, don't worry, this next part is the only part you need to understand. All of those details come together into one solution for attacking and defending each of Yesod's attacks. When Yesod raises his right hand, he will alternate blue, red, blue, red, blue to max the gauge and block the hand. When Yesod raises his left hand, he will alternate red, blue, red, blue, red to max the gauge and block the hand. When Yesod is preparing the vacuum, it doesn't matter which pillar you start with, as long as you alternate until there are no more pillars left on the field to block the vacuum. If you still didn't understand that, here's an even easier way. Movement on the left of the screen, hit left pillar and alternate. Movement on the right of the screen, hit right pillar and alternate. Windy sucky thing, break everything. As long as you remember the order and break the pillars accordingly, that is enough to get you through the raid. That said, there are two more important details you need to account for while breaking the pillars in order. Firstly, every time you break a pillar, you will get a 3.6 cost injection, and the X cost of the student who broke the pillar will be halved. You will need this cost to help you break all 5 pillars because without it, you wouldn't have enough time to make it. This is a lot of cost, possibly too much cost. Something you will need to stay on top of is making sure you do not overflow on your cost. If your cost overflows, all of those points are wasted. Each point wasted is potential damage that could have been spent on the boss. So use your cost. If things are too fast for you, play at 1x speed and take advantage of the slow motion from holding an X skill. Also, don't be afraid to use X skills besides your DPS. You can use the cost to pre-buff your DPS in preparation for the upcoming damage window. You can also use your cost on your healer, because throughout this whole process, your team will be steadily taking dot that may eventually kill them even if you successfully block Yesod's attacks. If you're successful in all of that, breaking the pillars in the correct order, preventing your cost from overflowing, and then blocking the attack, your analysis gauge will be maxed and your DPS window then starts. The cost recovery of on-field units will be doubled during this time, so you should throw every ability you possibly can while the gauge is still full. When Yesod recovers and starts preparing his next attack, that is when the gauge resets, your DPS window ends, and the process begins anew. This is Phase 1. You will cycle between 2 parts of non-stop action, breaking the pillars for the sake of your survival, and then throwing damage while Yesod is trying to recover from his failed attack. This is a very mechanically dense encounter. Getting overwhelmed will be quite normal, but as long as you constantly remind yourself to keep using your skills and breaking the pillars in an alternating manner, you will eventually defeat Yesod's main body. Phase 1 ends when you do so, and we then transition to Phase 2. In Phase 2, Yesod's right hand blocks your path. Completely opposite to the almost frantic intensity of Phase 1, Phase 2 is much slower and is mostly a puzzle you solve from the team building screen. Just like Phase 1, Phase 2 also has high innate damage resistance. Yesod's right hand will resist 99% of all incoming damage. It also has a defense value of 5000, further negating 75% damage. Attacking the hand directly is pointless. You will need to get rid of the obstacles in front to make progress. Said obstacles are on the right of the screen. 2 pillars stand in your way. Breaking them will debuff Yesod's damage resistance by 1000%. Translated, this means you'll be dealing 10 times the damage for each pillar you break. This debuff partially counters Yesod's innate resistance, bringing you up from 1% damage to 21% damage dealt. On lower difficulties, using regular DPS students to break the pillars is going to be viable. However, the next mechanic will do more damage than your own students ever could. Summoned to the field will be 4 drones to assist your students in combat. Each drone will be assigned to a striker on the team. These drones cannot be targeted and they are unable to deal critical damage. Instead, the drones will copy any buff granted by an X or basic skill to the student they are assigned to. For example, if you are using Momoi and buffs her attack speed, then the drone assigned to Momoi will be granted the same attack speed buff. Furthermore, the drones will have a very high base attack, and they will deal double their damage to any target that is inflicted with a focus fire debuff. Again, these drones will deal more damage than your own students can, so what you need to do is bring a team that can buff each other, which in turn buffs the drones. Students that can buff the whole team at once will be the most effective. You can also look out for students who might have very strong self-buffs. The most efficient buffs are attack speed and basic proficiency, followed by attack. Since the drones can't crit, you should not be considering crit or crit damage buffers. Note that skills which apply at the start of the battle, like sub-skills of special students, don't work on the drones because the drones will not copy buffs until they are on the field. While you're showering your students with buffs and letting the drones auto-attack the pillars or the hand, there is one more mechanic you will need to be active about. On the left of the screen are 2 invincible pillars. Every 4 seconds, they'll regenerate a small portion of their health, and at 100% HP, the pillars will deal heavy damage to your team and reduce their cost recovery by 400. which is a little over half of your natural recovery rate. These pillars can be crowd controlled. It only takes 3 seconds of CC to fill up the gauge, and once filled, the pillar's HP will be reset to 0. Dealing with this is pretty easy. Just bring CC. Preferably CC that can hit both pillars at once. If you CC the pillars when they're over 50% HP, then each pillar will grant the drones a 10% damage buff for 40 seconds, stacking up to 4 times. You don't want to rush your CC because this buff is pretty strong, but you don't need to be too mindful about it either. As long as you apply CC anywhere between 50% to 99% HP, you will have successfully dealt with this mechanic. That is basically all of Phase 2. If it felt like I said nothing, then that's the nature of this phase being much more simpler in comparison to Phase 1. But most activity you're going to get is Yesod's left fist occasionally slamming your team. Though this is a very predictable attack because he will only do it when the ATG is full, so you will see it coming. Otherwise, all of your action will be on the team building screen. As part of the guide, I will take you through team building, but before that, for those interested in Insane and above, let me briefly cover the minor changes you'll experience on the upper difficulties. On Insane and above, Yesod will have explosive, or red, damage type. This will make red armored students incredibly difficult to keep alive. If you want to force a red armored student's survival, you would need to bring dedicated shielders and healers just to keep that student alive. Most of the time, you're better off just bringing a blue or yellow armored student. In terms of mechanics, the changes are very simple in nature. Starting from Insane, Phase 1 will now have 99% damage reduction, up from the previous 95% damage reduction. If you were brute forcing before, you definitely cannot now. The pillars in Phase 1 can now spawn with either a reverse symbol or cross symbol. The reverse symbol will reset your analysis gauge before giving you the analysis level. The cross symbol will temporarily lock your analysis gauge. Break the pillar with the reverse symbol first so your gauge isn't wasted. Then break the pillar with the cross symbol last because if your gauge is maxed, then it doesn't matter if it gets locked. On Torment and Lunatic, Yesod will have a total of 300% crit damage resistance. This means if your student has 300% crit damage, this damage is negated and they will do the same damage as their regular damage on a critical hit. To counter these extra resistances, the analysis gauge doubles in effectiveness. At stage 5, you will have a total of 200% sonic effectiveness, 200% attack, 100% crit rate, 250% X damage, and 250% crit damage. All in all, gameplay hasn't changed, you still need to fill the gauge. Phase 2 only has one change you need to pay attention to. The CC requirement for the left pillars goes up from 3 seconds to 5 seconds. That's it. Be sure to double check the duration of your CC. That's all the changes on Insane and above. In summary, they don't change the way you engage with the boss if you're doing the raid correctly in the first place. What it does is double down on its mechanics and prevents brute forcing. So, to stop yourself from brute forcing, let's look at the teams we're going to have to build for Yesod. Something important to keep in mind as you watch this team building section is that as a live service gacha game, it's inevitable that the most recommended students will change as new ones are released. What will not change, however, are the core principles behind building the team. I strongly advise paying attention to the roles you have to fill out on the team rather than the students themselves. With that said, for Phase 1, you should bring at the minimum at least 1 DPS and 1 AoE healer. Your DPS has a lot of jobs to do. She needs to break 5 pillars, and then she needs to deal damage. Most DPS won't be able to handle both roles on their own, so you would usually bring 2. The DPS that could do it on their own would be the DPS who have redraw effects in their kits. If you're using a redraw support, you might be able to force any DPS into this position, but that can be very tricky to attempt. So if you're finding that 1 DPS isn't enough, look out for a second DPS to help handle both the pillars and the boss. While I'm here, I'd like to add that I don't normally call out specific students in my guides, but Wakamore specifically deserves an exceptional mention. At the making of this video, Wakamore's X skill is the only ability in the game to ignore Yesod's 95% damage resistance, while she still gets the full benefit of the raid's attack and X damage buffs. This makes her an overwhelmingly powerful option, but she does have 2 weaknesses. Firstly, although her X skill ignores damage reduction, her basic skill does not. So you must bring another DPS to help stack her flower bomb. In this sense, this makes Wakamore technically a sub-DPS. Her other weakness is that she has red armor, so on Insane and above, you will have to commit slots on your team just to keep her alive. This could come at a steep opportunity cost. Moving on, you're going to have to bring an AoE healer no matter who your DPS is going to be. The raid constantly ticks you with a dot that will eventually kill you if you weren't running a healer. Because it always hits your entire team at once, single target healers aren't as good as a primary heal option. However, if you find that one student is taking more damage than others, you could bring a single target healer as a secondary healer. The remaining slots can be filled with any offensive or defensive supports you see fit, including the aforementioned extra healer. With technically only 2 compulsory slots, that does leave you with a decent amount of room for customization. You could double down on the buffs provided by the analysis gauge, or bring units to ensure your survival. For Phase 2, your team building is going to look drastically different to Phase 1. You should bring, at the minimum, at least 1 healer or shielder, 1 AoE CC, 1 defense debuffer, and 1 focus fire. Although Yesod's only attack is very predictable, that wouldn't make it hurt any less. There's plenty of healers, so bringing any one of them could get your team through Phase 2 just fine. Because the attack is very predictable, shielders are an option too, especially since some shielders flex into other roles. AoE CC is compulsory, since without it your cost will get cut in half and you'll suffer much more damage. When picking your CC, be sure to check the duration of the skill effects. You want 3 seconds for extreme and below, and 5 seconds for insane and above. Phase 2 has a defense value of 5000, which equates to 75% damage reduction. To cut through this, a defense debuff will be necessary. Many defense debuffers flex into other roles as well. You want to be on the lookout for these students. Finally, having a focus fire on your team will double your damage output. If you have any of the focus fire students, you should have them on the team. That said, access to these students might be limited, so if you're a newer player without any focus fire, you'll have to make up for it with extra buffers instead. The rest of the team will be filled with as many buffers as possible. Attack speed buffers and basic proficiency buffers are the most effective, followed by attack buffers. Extra defense debuffers are also quite helpful, and if there are any students who have exceptional self buffs, those can be considered as well. Do not bring crit and crit damage buffers because the drones cannot crit. As mentioned earlier, see if you can bring students that can flex between multiple roles. The more roles one student can handle, the more buffs you can bring to the field to enhance the overall strength of the drones. It's a mix and match puzzle you solve by fully understanding your students' abilities and putting them together in an effective manner. This concludes the team building for both phases. Since these phases are so drastically different, you will find that a Phase 1 team is typically going to be very unsuccessful in Phase 2. On lower difficulties, you might be able to get away with standard teams where you use a DPS character to take down the pillars and the boss. But when tackling a level appropriate difficulty, you will find that you will need to retreat your team to bring out a new team for Phase 2. And with that, we are done with the Yesod raid guide. This boss is basically 2 entirely different encounters sharing the same HP bar. Phase 1 is non-stop dense action that can be hard to process even if you played it entirely in slow motion. Meanwhile, Phase 2 is a slow walk that makes you work your brain, not in gameplay, but in team select. In my opinion, Yesod is overall a healthy and fresh encounter for the Blue Archive raid experience. Phase 1 is probably the only encounter in the game that is puzzle-like, with design principles I think inspired by older, more traditional forms of gaming. Though unfortunately, through watching this guide, that puzzle has been spoiled to you now. The low interaction and slow activity of Phase 2 is not something I am a big fan of, but I do appreciate they are trying to introduce new and different ways to build a team. You have to think about students who you have never considered using before and realizing that some weird kids are actually very competent because they work for Yesod, which is honestly kind of fun. That said, we are playing a gacha game, and a gacha problem is definitely a frustrating bottleneck that some players are unfortunately going to run into. Whether you're one of these people who might get stuck in this bottleneck, or whether you're lucky enough to have a wide roster of students to tackle the boss in creative ways, I wish you good luck and to have fun.